The Ask LOJ questions are awesome, as always. A massive trade, Lauri's progression, Walker, guard line, jumping, making the next step, draft picks, the rest. You guys rock, and this show will too. It's coming up next. It's Locked on Jazz. Ba-dum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum. Pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, and geeky numbers. And today, we run through Ask LOJ questions that are just awesome. Let me run down. We're going to touch on not a single trade, whether it pushes us, but if we double up on our trades here in the next month, do we become a championship team? A massive question. Walker Kessler's progression. We're touching on that today in the show. Collins or Olynyk? Why is everybody assuming John Collins is starting, according to some of the questions coming in? Who takes the biggest leap of our group? Interesting questions about Lauri's progression. How do you rotate the guard line? Great questions came in, plus Arrested Development questions, trends in the league. You guys all nailed it today, so we're going to get to that, and there's a ton of them. See if we can get to all of them in time. As I mentioned, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz and Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you for making Locked on Jazz your first listen, and thanks to the everydayers that make Locked on so great. We are free and available on all podcasting apps. Also up on YouTube under Locked on Jazz. Please subscribe, give 5 stars, follow along. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks so much for being part of the show. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked on. Special thanks to FanDuel for their support, available for you if you want to get in on the over-unders of the NBA, or if you want to do some other fun stuff. It's the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. All right, let's get to it right away because the question's great. So the first question came in to me via email, and it was if the Jazz trade for Dame Lillard, and I first read it, if the Jazz trade for Dame Lillard or OG Anunoby, would you consider the Jazz a championship contender? And then I realized he didn't mean either. He meant both. That in the next month and a half, before the NBA season starts, we trade for both Dame Lillard and OG Anunoby. He traded 5 first-round draft picks, Taylor Hendricks, Bryce Sensabaugh, and Colin Sexton, and had a lineup of Dame Lillard, Jordan Clarkson, OG Anunoby, Lauri Markkanen, and Walker Kessler. Are we an NBA championship contender at that point? So I think my thought on that is I've always thought that being a championship contender is being top 4 in your conference, and then you never know what might happen. So in that sense, yeah, I think we would probably, in a really tight Western Conference race, move into top 4 in the West. The one question I would have on this, and this is where being, trying to build a championship team, and this is what I admire that Ryan and Danny and Justin are trying to do so much, because quite frankly, I think building a championship team is virtually impossible. And so I've always been one where I would build a team to be top 4 in my conference, and then if I can get 2 sprained ankles along the way or something, maybe we get lucky. But the fact of the matter is, who wins championships? Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Steph Curry, the best players in the world. So if we have Dame Lillard and Lauri Markkanen as our best 2 players, and OG Anunoby is our 3rd best player, we're pretty good. OG Anunoby was 3rd best player in Toronto last year. It wasn't great. But do we have that guy? Like, Dame's top 15 player in the NBA right now, I think. I mean, he had a great year last year, so maybe you could argue top 10, but probably top 15, and Lauri's top 20, 25. So you're missing that guy, and that's what makes building a championship team so impossible. So are we a contender? Sure. Are we a championship team with those 2? I don't know. But I did love the effort to try to pull off that kind of massive a deal on both sides of that. I thought that was truly pretty great. So I was all in on that level of play. All right, let's get the questions that came in with the hashtag AskLOJ. Let's start it off right here. Did we get it to work? We did. If we end up retaining our pick, and I started with this for a reason, for the Thunder this year, 1 through 10 in the lottery, is the pick just pushed to the next year, or the Thunder, or still protected 1 through 10, or does it turn into 2 seconds? So this is really a very, very important question to everything about the Jazz season this year. And it's probably going to be the number one question asked about the Jazz season for a while. Here's my understanding of the Utah Jazz pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. It is 1 through 10 this year. If we use it, then the pick moves on next year as well, and I believe it goes to 1 through 8 at that point. And then it has even another year where it's encumbered and drops its restrictions a little bit more than that. So the trick here for the Jazz is that it moves to 2025 with the same top 10 protections and then top 8 protections in 2026. If it's still not conveyed by then the Oklahoma City, I think then it becomes 2 seconds. But we have to be bad in the top 10 in picks until 2026, and I don't think anyone's intending that. So there's a really big argument from the Jazz that, like, hey, we're better off if we get rid of this encumberment on the pick. It also means we can't trade any of our future picks until this pick is moved. It's holding up some of our flexibility. So there is a real argument that the Jazz are better off if they can get rid of that pick, move it down, give it to Oklahoma City this year, and then just not be bothered by it, then have their own pick for 2025. It would mean we have no draft picks in 2024 coming up, which might be fine when you have 3 first-round draft picks this year. You're just, at some point, you cannot develop all these players at the same time. So I thought that was a really good question. I thought it was important we got that right out there. David, good to have you back. What is the best option for the Jazz, 26, 36, or 46? And he asked based on the Thunder pick. So this gets into the same question. So the Jazz front office, I think, believes that trying to get out of the top 10 and letting the Thunder have their pick and then not having their pick encumbered for 2025 and 2026 and beyond is the best option for the Jazz flexibility and moving forward. And so that's why you go trade for John Collins and you're re-signing Jordan Clarkson, and you're not doing things in which you would be clearly trying to get into the top 10 of the pick. I might be a little bit more if you just kind of let it play out. All right, Kobe wants to know, what do you think Walker Kessler are fair in the playoffs, and how will it differ from the Jazz playoff results with Gobert? So this has a lot to do with how Walker develops. The struggles that Rudy Gobert had in the playoffs were predicated on 3 items. And those 3 items for Rudy Gobert in the playoffs were, 1, team stretched us out to 5 out and he couldn't get to the rim as much. Nothing you can do about that. That really wasn't Rudy's fault. And then our inability to handle dribble penetration was the problem. If you're playing 5 out and you're a 7-foot rim protecting center, it's awfully hard to be there. It's where if Taylor Hendricks can develop into another rim protector, and then you have 2 rim protectors and 2 athletes and they stretch you out 5 wide, one guy can probably get to the rim in time to protect the rim. That's pretty vital. That's where Durant and Draymond were great together. There's some other examples. The second area where Rudy really struggled on the defensive end was that you didn't really want to switch him. And so you're playing drop big, and the teams that make the NBA playoffs in advance have mid-range shooters that are really good, forcing Rudy to play up a little higher and a little bit more uncomfortably. Okay? That's probably going to be an issue for Walker Kessler too. We'll see over time. The Jazz started switching Walker at the end of last year. I was reviewing some notes at the end of games last year, and they were switching Walker in some of those games, which is interesting. And we'll see how Walker develops on that, but that's the same concept that every 7-footer deals with. Denver survived it with Jokic this year. The third one is that Rudy just was bad offensively, right? That when teams switched on Rudy, and this was really the biggest issue, is the other 2 are not big on. They're much talked about, but I'm not, like, they don't move my meter the same way. This one was the issue, is that when you switch 1 through 5, teams would switch 1 through 5, and Rudy could not take advantage of the smaller player on him. I think Walker will be able to do that. That's where Walker offensively will be far superior to what Rudy ever was offensively. I don't know that Walker will ever be what Rudy was defensively. I know we want to believe that, but he's 3-time defensive player of the year, best defensive player of the generation. It's a pretty high standard. So I do think that we'll see Walker offensively be able to take advantage of switches and be more impactful offensively than Rudy ever was, and therefore maybe in the playoffs be able to take advantage of some of the defenses. On the other end, we are just seeing fewer and fewer. Like, it used to be the 6'1" guy was switching on you. You're now getting switched to a 6'5", 6'6" guy. Rudy's base was so high he couldn't set himself to be strong and powerful down low. I think Walker will be able to. So Walker will be able to take advantage of switches. That'll be big this upcoming year to see how Walker does on those kind of plays. Will teams figure out Walker Kessler's blocks and dunks in his second season like they figured out how to slow down Rudy the year after his monster dunk season? I don't know. I think that, Quinn did something in the NBA with Rudy playing with the lob that the league wasn't ready for, and then they adapted to. I don't know that we did anything differently last year, other than Walker was really good and we ran the pick and roll. But I do think teams will just be far more aware of Walker than they were a year ago. I think that's probably the best way to say it, is that teams will just be so much more aware of Walker. And so, yes, but I also think that'll open up some three-point shooting. We didn't have very good shooting last year. If we have good shooting, it's going to be really hard to do. There's just certain points where you can't be everywhere, but it's a good question and a good thing. All right, when we continue, John Collins or Kelly Olynyk, we got a frustrated fan. We'll touch on that. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. Let me outline this one for you. If you're looking for a car right now, the first part is like, who are you buying it from? So actually, the first part is what brand are you buying, right? That's what price point are you looking for? So I strongly suggest that you include Hyundai in your search, because for the price point, you cannot get more features. You cannot get more good safety grades. You cannot get more award winners for that price point. You may decide you want the flashy little brand on the front of your car that's more impressive to you than Hyundai, and that matters. It does. Or you can decide that for the dollar, I want every bell, every whistle in a car that does everything and lasts longer, has all the safety. 100% up to you. Like, this is your car, you're driving it. Some people see it as a part of their personality. So that's the first thing. And the Hyundai's got it from the Sonata to the Elantra on the sedans to the Kona all the way up to the Palisade on the SUVs are absolutely fabulous, the 4 different sizes. And then the electric cars, the Ioniq 5, which we have, and the Ioniq 6, which I yearn for. Absolutely fabulous. The second part of this is then, who are you buying from? And that's the Murdochs. Plus 90 years in Utah, at the no regrets philosophy. Blake, a member of our community, very just feels beholden to making sure that you have an unbelievably great experience when you go to Murdoch, and that the Murdochs are a part of your experience and a part of the community, and you're a part of the same one. As Blake said during the COVID, I'm not upping prices on people because I'm going to go to the grocery, see them at the grocery store, and I'm going to see them at church, and we're just not going to make an extra $5,000 off a bunch of our fellow citizens. And that's who they are and how they approach things. That's Murdochs. 4646 South State Street, also in Logan and in Linden. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel, the official sports book of Locked On, bringing you a pretty darn good deal right now. If you're into Major League Baseball or you want to do something else, bet Major League Baseball for the first time, you can get your first no-sweat first bet deal going with FanDuel. And right now, it's a pretty fabulous one. If you bet $20, you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to over-unders to who you think will hit the first home run. I told you to take Ohtani. Dude, what a day. He wins the first game of the doubleheader and hits 2 jacks in the second. Are you kidding me? My goodness. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today. FanDuel.com/lockedon to get your $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks so much to the everydayers that make Locked On great. Great chat in the YouTube. The questions today on Ask. I almost didn't do an Ask LOJ today, and then I was like, yeah, of course we're going to do an Ask LOJ, because the questions always come in are so great. So let's get back to it. I find it really annoying. Paul is upset. Everyone thinks John Collins is getting the starting 4 position. I really don't think he's earned it, and I hope for him that the, whatever he calls it, deformity on his fan has healed. So I don't know that John Collins starts. Everyone has assumed it. You are correct. The next question that came in was somewhat related, which is, it seems assumed that Kelly will move to the bench and Collins will start, but who will close? So let's touch on this. First thing is Kelly's going to play a lot. You want to know why? Because Kelly's really good. And Kelly is a ball mover and a ball distributor and a good shooter, and he plays the game right, and he makes his teammates better. Kelly's really good. And it's going to be really hard to keep Kelly off the floor. So that's the first thing that I would say on this, is that let's not underestimate how good Kelly is. Because I think we could make some mistakes on that. Just to say, the new flavor of the month is John Collins. No. Kelly, we don't have a lot of ball movers on this roster. So there's an argument that if you're starting Jordan Clarkson, Ochai Agbaji, Lauri Markkanen, you actually need Kelly Olynyk on the floor as another ball mover. There's also an argument that you need Kelly Olynyk on the floor with the second team because he's a settling force, he moves the ball, and he can probably play center. He's not great at it. So if Walker, a little bit of this discussion is if Walker Kessler's, how is it all mixing and matching, right? So, for example, I think Lowry's playing probably 20, I think, we'll see. I think Lauri ends up playing, I could be totally wrong on this, about 20 minutes a night at small forward and about 14 minutes a night at center. And Walker's playing 30 minutes a night as the other center, and then Lauri slides back and we play stretch 5, and then I have Olynyk playing the 4 in those minutes with John Collins, and Ochai probably sliding into play some of the backup 3 minutes, which then allows Keontae and Colin Sexton to play together in the backcourt there. So then you're suddenly, your second unit, is Keontae, Colin Sexton, Ochai, Kelly Olynyk, Lauri Markkanen. It's not a great rebounding lineup. That's problematic. You got to figure that out. But it is a good ball mover. It is a 5, stretched out 5. I like it because it gives Colin Sexton and Keontae George big driving lanes with 5 out. It allows you to probably switch 1 through 5 defensively. It does some things. Could John Collins play that instead of Kelly Olynyk? Maybe. But John Collins not the ball mover that Kelly Olynyk is. With Colin Sexton and Keontae George on the floor, you might want a ball mover. So all this has to do with kind of how they all mix and match together. It's super interesting. And one thing we haven't talked about, we probably should talk about next week, what combinations do you want to make sure are always on the floor? I think we probably have to have either Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton on the floor at all times. I think, right? Who else? Don't we have to have somebody who can put the ball on the floor, go to the basket, create an opportunity? Talon can do that a little bit. I don't know that Talon makes the rotation. I mean, I gave the case yesterday of where I think he still has growth to be had, but I don't know that he makes the rotation. It's hard to play 10 guys. You really can play 9. So I kind of see Olynyk bouncing between to where we are, the 5, the 4, playing in that little slot, and I see Agbaji sliding over. I probably am short 1 guy. No, I've got 9 guys. No, I only have 8 guys playing right now. So there's one other guy to play. And maybe it's Taylor Hendricks, and then whose minutes are going there. But I think as of right now, I have our 4 guards as Clarkson, Agbaji, Sexton, George, Agbaji sliding to the 3 with Markkanen, Collins, Kessler, Olynyk as our front court. So I only have got 8 guys playing in that. Does Talon get time as another guard? Does Hendricks get time for 10 minutes a night as another forward? Does Yerksen just play center and we stay the same way? It's interesting. But I think what we haven't really delved into is who should be paired with whom and how do they play? Who is likely to improve their game the most out of Walker, Ochai, Luka, Taylor Hendricks, THT, Keontae George? Luka Samanic could be the 10th guy, or the 9th guy there too, by the way. All right. Who's improving the most? So I'm going to take Taylor Hendricks and Keontae George off this question from Lee because of the fact that I don't know what they're improving from. So now who's improving the most? Walker, Ochai, Samanic, Taylor Horton-Tucker. I'm going to take Walker. I know Walker had a great year last year. I think he'll play the most. The player who probably needs to improve the most is probably Ochai. Right? Ochai, I'm not sure, has fully established himself as an NBA rotation player. I think he will this year, so maybe he takes that big. Maybe he's the answer. But I'm not sure that you look at Ochai's 41 games at the end of the year and say, okay, I'm 100% certain that's a rotation player in the NBA. I think it's close. I could be being a little tough on that. You could decide you disagree. Walker's year was like, oh, he's a bona fide center. And I mean, Will said he's a bona fide centerpiece for a defense in the NBA. Now he's got to do it. So I think that's the biggest step. Walker gets the biggest step. He gets the biggest opportunity. He gets the most chance. Ochai maybe has the most important step. Is that Ochai can go and proves, and maybe proves he's a starter. Right? I kind of have Ochai in the starting lineup with Colin Sexton right now. With Jordan Clarkson right now. I'll be honest, I'm kind of not talked to anyone and I'm making all this up in my mind. And maybe they, the way Will and his staff works, I would guess that they don't have preconceived notions. In the final 42 games, Ochai shot 43% and 37% from three. That's pretty, in 10 points a game. That's pretty great. And 87% from the free throw line. In the final 15 games, when Ochai wore down and they just extended him out and, he suddenly started taking, I think it was, if I remember correctly on Ochai, in his first 20 games of playing time, he had one game where he took more than 10 shots. And then in his final 20 games, if I remember correctly, he did it like 16 times. There's a little bit of I'm not quite right. But my point is that they stretch Ochai out. And in those final 20 games when he's stretched out, he shoots 39% from the field and 33% from three. Somewhere in between those two numbers is where Ochai establishes himself and becomes a bona fide rotation, maybe even starting player in the NBA, and that's where you feel comfortable with him. Though that's the only reason. If you're wondering why I'm kind of like Ochai still has to prove it, is his first 20 games he wasn't impactful enough to be proving that he was a rotation. His numbers were fine, but he wasn't impactful enough. Then in the second 20 games of that 41 game stretch, he was not only impactful, but he was actually like thrown to the wolves a little bit, maybe more than you would expect him to be. And so his efficiency dropped. And so there's a fine middle ground there, which he's probably going to find this year, which I think then you say, yeah, okay, that's a big step. And maybe that's the one who improves the most. Same question came from Tingus. Which player do I expect to have the biggest leap? So the biggest leap, maybe to sum this up, is Ochai. The most important leap is going to be Walker. If Clarkson is the point who starts on the other guard spot, I can build a case for Colin, Ochai, Talon, or Keontae. I missed you. Glad you're back. Thanks, Russ. And then Russ continues and says, with the top... I thought Russ did continue. Here it is. Am I correct in thinking that Colin is currently the best player of the four? Ochai is better team player. Talon is the better ball handler. And Keontae has the higher upside and could use the reps for the starters. Those are all good thoughts. So I think, again, I probably need to talk to some people and make sure I'm in line. I think either Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton on the floor together at the same time. Okay. On the floor, I want 48 minutes of Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton on the floor. I think that's my first one. Like, okay, if I'm building our rotation, super fun. I've actually been able to go to coaches meetings where the coaches literally at the beginning of the year sit down and like try to piece this together, and you create these rules, right? Like, so the Jazz had Bojan and Rudy had to be on the floor together for a year after when they tried to figure out how to use them correctly. And Mike Conley and Rudy match. Okay, well then how do you work the others? I don't feel like Will's that regimented, but let's assume he is for kind of a minute. Then I want Jordan or Clarkson or Colin on the floor at one point at all times. So therefore, if Jordan's starting, which I kind of feel like at 30 whatever years old and veteran and paid what he is, that he's starting, then I have Colin coming off the bench. So now who's the fit next to that? And I think that's where I would go Ochai and allow him to guard the best offensive player of the other team and be that guy. He's probably physically be our best defender. So he guards the best wing defender of the group. I don't want Colin small, so I don't want Colin doing that. And I don't want Keontae doing that. And I don't want Jordan doing that. So I think that's where Ochai starts next to Jordan, right? So, okay, now I've figured out a few roles. I need Ochai guarding their best player. I need Jordan deserves it. I want Jordan and Colin split. Then if I'm playing Keontae or Talon, I want them on either of them. I want them on an open floor. And when Walker's not playing center, we're playing 5 out. So that means Yerkes 7 isn't playing. Samanic could play. Hendricks could play. whoever that 10th guy, 9th guy is I didn't include in our past conversation, I can now piece that together. Do I want Collins, not the greatest ball handler, decision maker. He's an incredible burst player off the ball. So do I want Olynyk, interestingly enough, on the floor with Collins, or do I want Keontae on the floor with Collins? Because then Keontae handles. Like, who's handling? We don't have a point guard per se, but like who's conducting a little bit? Those kind of, who's rebounding, right? Like my Markkanen, Olynyk, Agbaji lineup might be one of the worst rebounding lineups I could possibly put together on our floor. Kelly's well below average. Agbaji, I think, was below average. Markkanen, I think, is below average. Like, gosh, that could be a real disaster. So does John Collins need to step in there somehow to rebound for this team? But then Olynyk's not on the floor with Colin Sexton, and then you're really relying on Keontae to do the ball handling. Like one of Olynyk's best traits is he's Point Kelly. So it's really fascinating and going to be really fun to keep talking about. Those are great questions. I appreciate it. We'll come back. Next question coming in is which top players, so many games, with top players missing so many games, especially since the Jazz seemingly less effort by teams players in regular season game to accurately evaluate how a rebuilding team like the Jazz are. This, by Trent, is probably the single most important and best question of the day. So we'll try to address it next on Locked On Jazz. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. And thanks to the everydayers that make Locked On Jazz what it is. Danny kind of alluded to this during the press conference, that the opening stretch of the season last year by the Jazz, he wasn't as moved by considering how many players missed games. It's probably worth revisiting. I don't remember. I mean, I do remember guys missing games. I don't remember that it was like, opening night against Denver when we beat them by 21. My thought was that they had their group, and they did. So I'd have to go back and kind of go through each of those games for a while and try to remember. Like Timberwolves early on, when we played them early in the season, my memory is they had their group, and I think they did. But then shortly thereafter, I think it falls apart. I think there's two things, Trent, that are great about this question. One is exactly that. Like, how do we evaluate guys that didn't play? And then number two is the last 20 games of the year. Like, I'll be really honest. I asked somebody late in the year last year, like, how do I evaluate these numbers? And they literally said to me, like, you don't. You don't. That no one's playing in the role they're gonna, in either positively or negatively. Like, you don't look at Ochai Abaji's 39% and 30% from three and say, oh, he's not going to be able to play. You just don't. You don't probably look at Talen Horton-Tucker's 17 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists and decide that he's like a walking triple-double either way on this. Their comment to me is you just don't. No one's playing in the role they're going to play. A lot of these teams are limited. So that, I think, is one of the most difficult concepts that the Jazz have is in this process. What's real and what's not? Trent, you're right on it. Do you see some regression from Lauri this season after career year, or everything he did was sustainable? This is an important question too. You guys are really great. I'm giving each of these questions kind of 2 minutes, and I think there's actually some real depth to a lot of these that need to probably be dug into more, and we have time. So the first thing on Lauri, I would say, is the three-point shooting was at 39%. His career was at 37%. So that could slip a tiny bit, but there's actually one kind of bad outlier year in there, and everything else is right around 36, 37. So I think that probably the three-point shooting holds. The overall two-point shooting, I think, should hold as well. I mean, really what he did was he got more efficient around the basket in his shooting. He didn't take like a huge amount of mid-range jumpers or anything of that nature that kind of, there's no crazy outlier number. The outlier numbers, he finished 72% at the rim instead of 67% at the rim. And from 3 to 10 feet, he went from 45 to 50%. That's probably a little high. He has a huge jump in his long twos, but he just didn't take enough of them to have an impact. The biggest thing that changed on Lauri, frankly, is he dunked it 111 times, and 11% of his shots were dunks instead of 7. Well, if he keeps doing that, that's going to get your numbers up. So I actually thought most of everything we saw out of Lauri was pretty legitimate last year. Borderline All-NBA, I think he's really special. Is there a chance everyone's seriously underestimating this Jazz team? Let's say the Jazz finish number 6, win a playoff series, How does this affect them in the next offseason? It's an interesting question. I don't think everyone's underestimating the Jazz. What I think is that the difference between the top and the bottom teams is tighter than we're used to having. So that when you get picked, like we are right now, like what are we picked? About 10th or 11th in the West, you could get to 6th or 7th pretty easily just with a few things happening, a few guys stepping up, and a few things not going right on the other team. If we win a playoff series, definitely would feel like it accelerates things. But for us to win a playoff series, there's a bunch of players that would have to just go be just completely different than who they are right now. So that's super hard for me to answer because like it would all probably mean that Keontae has to have a Donovan type rookie year. It probably means that Ochai has to become Norm Powell, that Walker Kessler has become Rudy Gobert, and that Lauri is still Lauri, and that John Collins is back to, like, there's just a lot that would have to happen for that to happen. So hard to evaluate, what it would mean for the upcoming season. Is it disappointing if the Jazz win less than last year? It seems like there was an optimism in Jazz Nation. There is, but I've kind of all season long thought that the Jazz there was a real chance at 26, 36, 46, and we were at 26. I mean, so our 36 last year, I'm not sure should be a benchmark by which, we're looking at. I mean, there's probably some memory things we need to do about, after we traded Mike Conley and Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt, our offense went to, I think, 22nd or 23rd in the NBA from 4th. Lauri didn't play a lot of those games. We played some. Jordan didn't play very many of those games. We played some. Like, what is it that we're going to do in this season with this personnel that is going to not have us be 24th in the league offensively? Right? So I think some of those things we probably need to revisit a little bit as to what we actually think is completely feasible. All right, there are just a bunch more questions. I've got a week worth of shows or 3 days worth of shows next week to give you. This may be the most important questions in everyone's mind because I do hear this all the time. Not much of a question. You remind me of Michael Bluth, Jason Bateman from Arrested Development. I just wanted you to acknowledge it. I'm acknowledging it. I've heard it, but Jason Bateman's podcast is way more successful than mine. So I don't know where that leaves us. Have a great one, everyone. Hopefully that gives you a laugh for the weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much for being a part of Locked On Jazz.